Welcome to Fynders Keepers, the vodcast powered by Asset Find. Here, we talk with the people shaping the future of global financial asset recovery, from industry veterans to technology innovators. Each episode uncovers new insights, real-world challenges, and the emerging tools helping companies locate and recover billions in unclaimed financial assets worldwide. If it touches finance, data, or discovery, we're talking about it here. This is Fynders Keepers, where every conversation uncovers something worth finding. Well, welcome to today's episode of Fynders Keepers called The Art of Staying Compliant. And our guest has been in the unclaimed property world longer than most people have known it existed as a specialty. Carla McGlynn is co-founder and partner of UPCR, which stands for Unclaimed Property Consulting and Reporting. This is built after stints at Tiffany & Co., Deloitte, and Ernst & Young. She served as president of UPO, has been on conference stages since 2003, and brings over 25 years of helping companies get compliant before the auditor shows up. UPCR is also certified women-owned small business, holding its own against the big four in a space they've long dominated. Carla, what a resume. So glad to have you on Fynders Keepers.
Oh, thanks for the invitation. I'm very happy to be here.
And, selfishly, you had me at Tiffany & Co. And, what a great way to start and get my attention. Now, you've built your career in unclaimed property at a time when, most people had never even heard of the field. So what was that moment when you knew that this is where you wanted to plant your flag?
That's a really great question, actually, and asked of me very often. It's like, why would you leave the tax space, which is where I started? When I was at Tiffany & Co., I came in as an internal auditor, and I did a rotation across all of the financial areas in the company. And one of the areas that I truly loved was tax. And one of the topics or one of the agenda items that aligned with tax was unclaimed property. And so we started to explore the issues. And then later on, when I went into my master's, I pursued my master's in tax and received a master's in tax. One of our educators, professors, was a Deloitte partner. And he had a session that touched upon unclaimed property. And I was like, wait, what? What did you just say? We were just exploring this, and now you're mentioning it as a tax service at Deloitte. So no one else really wanted to take this on. I didn't even know whether or not this was going to be a temporary area. I really love tax. I felt like it was my area of expertise. And then later on, someone had introduced me to issues that not only I could identify with from my previous employer, but now at Deloitte, I was exposed to so many other companies that were experiencing the same. And I really found that it was an opportunity to work with these companies so that can minimize risk, educate them, because we were learning at that time. I mean, this was 30 years ago. We were still learning and we're continuing to learn, but it just seemed like a space where it felt tedious to a lot of people. And I felt like, wait a second, I'll do it. I'll help these businesses. There was one company that just came in and they were being audited by the state of New York. And they said, what do we do? We're looking at outstanding checks. We're doing this, we're doing that. And so it really gave us an opportunity to really help the business in mitigating. And I just fell in love with that opportunity to resolve issues. And it seemed like something different from tax. And so it was just that hook of being able to work with companies, resolve these issues, continue to learn and explore an area that was still very new to many, just hooked me in. And I ended up spending what was 100% of my time in tax to 80% of my time, and then 20% to unclaimed property, that it reversed, and then it ended up becoming 80% to then 100%. And I was given an opportunity at a very young age and position to lead a practice in this space as part of an indirect tax solution. So it was just an absolute opportunity. And I'm so glad that I made the leap.
Well, it sounds like it was a very smart leap and a calculated risk at that. And I think it's paid off for both you as well as the industry as a whole, given your expertise. So now you mentioned 25, 30 years. You've had a front row seat in the industry. What are some of the biggest changes that you've seen?
Oh, the changes have evolved dramatically. I mean, just think about this. When I first started, we were paper based. Can you imagine? We had
I
to
can. Sadly, I can. I can.
Yeah, there were entries in fields on these grid forms to fill out. And then we evolved into accepting Excel spreadsheets to enter the information in that NAPA format, to very little standardization. I mean, very little. Every state was working in a silo, and all of our, holders had to essentially adapt to every different state. And granted, there's no two states that are alike. Still today, there's no two states that are alike. But today, I mean, some of the key changes would be like a shift to electronic reporting, right? So now we're doing more uploading to state websites, the formatting, the due diligence requirements now are evolving as well. They're, eventually I'm hoping that will expand to more acceptance of email communication, since we're now capturing and accounts are being created using email as opposed to an address. So
Right.
there's also changes in dormancy periods. I mean, when I first started, it was double digit dormancy periods to now looking at payroll in more than, I want to say 75% of the states having a 1 year dormancy for payroll, to even shorter if a company is dissolving, where you have to report early. And I would also have to say the explosion of third party auditors enforcing on behalf of states. I mean, when we first started, it was NAPCO. That was the audit firm that was auditing at that time, and we felt that they were very aggressive with their audits, which is great. I mean, I feel like we all have a purpose, whether it's holders, service providers, and auditors, we all have a purpose. But I feel like there's been much more of a presence in third party audits, and not only third party audits in the traditional sense, but third parties involved in overseeing self audits. So that has really changed. So, but I want to say that probably the most important change is greater awareness of unclaimed property compliance. That probably has been, I think I commend the states for just being out there marketing that there's property that's out there for recovery,
Right.
and explaining how that property gets there just really motivates businesses to take a greater interest in compliance and taking more of a proactive approach to compliance than a reactive. So communication, marketing, just putting information out there to educate everyone who is touched by unclaimed property compliance is probably the biggest changes in recent times.
Well, I'm sure that, that also helps you as well, because if the awareness is increased, it certainly makes your role that much more important and that much more central. And it sounds like the awareness has increased, but of course, there's always work to be done. And of course, UPCR focuses on the compliance side, while Asset Fine focuses on the asset recovery side. So, from your perspective, how do the two sides of the equation come together to benefit a company that's either operating domestic or globally?
That's also a really great question. And I think that compliance and recovery are like two sides of the same coin. Just think about it. I mean, they work beautifully together. You have UPCR assisting businesses that need to report and remit and property file, their filing obligations. They need to comply, and they need to do it correctly. They need to do it efficiently, and they need to consider minimizing their risk, right? And then they also, once they come into compliance, they would then use a firm like yours, Asset Find, to to essentially identify and help not only companies, but let's say their employees, their stakeholders, their vendors in recovering funds that may be sitting with the states. So I think that it's a great complement where you have a company that's being assisted by UPCR to come into compliance, and then you have that same company take advantage of the opportunities of property that's out there for recovery. I really do.
Right.
And
It's
then
an
from
offset.
a global perspective, yeah, from a global perspective, it's just an additional layer that you would just need to expand on, not only addressing the domestic compliance issues, but now folding in the international laws, since now countries are taking full advantage of unclaimed property and expanding their laws so that they can also require or enforce compliance. And then again, another opportunity to have Asset Find come in and identify property for those same businesses. So it really is a tremendous compliment to have both services. It essentially, it provides for and it strengthens like an entire ecosystem if you think about it, you know?
Yeah, I think that was well said. Now, I want to unpack some of the things you mentioned. So, I want to talk a little bit about escheatment, right? And you said it earlier, escheatment laws can vary pretty wildly across, you said there's no two states that are the same, territories across international jurisdictions. So, when we talk about a global company that realizes that they're dealing with unclaimed property obligations in multiple places at once, how does that compliance conversation, which I'm sure is complicated and complex, how does that even start?
Most of our conversations just start with exploring. Do a risk assessment. And a risk assessment would entail looking at your business. I like to, when initially interesting, getting a company interested in considering compliance, is to take, let's say, NAPA's property type codes and match that up to the business, and let's say take a trial balance and compare, because the way that I look at it, any business has three areas that are likely to have unclaimed property issues, not to necessarily to say that there's something reportable, but to at least consider for compliance. So if you have employees, you may have payroll issues. If you operate as a business, you may have vendor payments or customer refund payments. If you provide a product or a service, you may have accounts receivable. So understanding the business and how that transactional activity can develop into unclaimed property issues would be a starting point. And to scope out those businesses and then to help them to prioritize based on the property types, based on where they're conducting their business, where they have their transactional activity, conduct a high level risk assessment, and then use that in order to prioritize how they're going to conduct their compliance with each state. And that may involve a voluntary disclosure opportunity, and take advantage of those voluntary disclosure. Get ahead, do a risk assessment so that you can be proactive and reach out to those states proactively, engage with those states rather than waiting for a notice to come in the mail. So that's how I would recommend approaching anyone who is interested in complying if they haven't already. And if they have been filing, still an opportunity to conduct a risk assessment to see if there's any reporting gaps. There's oftentimes there's changes in staff, and with those changes in staff could mean lapses in reporting. So it's always great to run a risk assessment, whether you believe you're in compliance or not in compliance, and then also use that risk assessment to learn, and if you have a policy and procedure, to enhance that policy and procedure, freshen it up, engage your team in those enhancements. And if you're not in compliance, use this risk assessment and this exercise to create a policy and procedure so that you can maintain compliance going forward.
So, if I just sort of break this down, first of all, it sounds like the methodology in general is quite similar, whether you're operating, domestic or global. It's sort of those three areas that you need to focus on. The risk assessment is the key here and the foundation of everything. And then I also sort of heard that it's not really a one and done kind of thing. It might start with that process, but given that there can be changes always at your organization and things are dynamic, you sort of need to come back and keep rechecking to make sure that it's fresh and up to date. Is that fair?
It's fair. And, unclaimed property needs to be appreciated as a cross-functional exercise, right? You're involving treasury for the bank accounts. You're involved, and who's monitoring those accounts and opening and closing those accounts. You're working with legal. You're working with audit. You're working with accounts payable. You're working with the payroll department. So it's a collective, it's a process that includes a collective effort across all the functions within a business. So, and that's, we really pride ourselves in that's our goal in working with any business, is recognizing that it shouldn't just sit with one department, that all of the departments that can contribute should contribute and should be involved with the process. So if you are approaching an executive at a business and saying, you may have an issue, let's pull in your payroll department to understand. Let's pull in your accounts payable department. Get them involved so that they can appreciate how much of an asset they are to the company and to continued compliance.
Right. So it's certainly not an isolated exercise. It really has to be,
Really is.
approached very collaboratively. Now let's talk about your time when you served as UPPO president, and you served during a period of significant regulatory change. Now this is your opportunity. I'm allowing you to sort of self promote here. What did you push the hardest during that time, and how do you think that your advocacy has shaped where the industry stands today?
Um, well, I really enjoy my time at UPPO. It's one of those organizations that it's hard not to take pride in, because it is an organization that represents the holder and the service provider tremendously. So we really, as a president is in a position to lead a board, but it was the board's effort, and it was our vision and our mission for UPPO and how best we can serve our members. So we really paid a lot of attention to professional development, okay, a lot to education. We're also pushing for the best interests of the holder community, uniformity, fair laws for holders. Why? So that it increases compliance. If you burden the holder, then the likelihood that they're going to be able to efficiently comply lessens. So the more that we can open the communication with the states, express our concerns, advocate for the holder community, the more that the purpose and the mission of the UPPO organization really matters. And we really prided ourselves in making that happen and continuing from predecessor, presidents and board members, and hoping that that is going to continue on as the board, changes its board members. So it was, I'm really proud as a UPPO member and a board member, a past board member, to be a voice for our practitioners, and that's what we really, pride ourselves. So today, more and more states are adopting elements of the revised Uniform Unclaimed Property Act, which was in 2016. So it's essentially expressing the importance of what was put into RUPA, and now witnessing that, even it's almost 10 years later, witnessing how the states are rolling out components of RUPA into their laws. So it was a really, really fun time. I miss being on the board, but I'm really excited to see that our mission continues on, and that those that are there still express the same values that us prior presidents and board members have had witnessed and had been involved with in the past.
Well, I'm sure UPPO is lucky, would say that they were lucky to have you. And I'm sure you
Oh, thank you.
collectively and individually had a great impact and continue to. Now, let's talk about, UPCR is a women owned small business, certified women owned small business in a space that has been historically dominated by the large multi service firms and the big four. So, tell me about your journey and what that's meant for how you've built, the culture, the company, and the kinds of clients that you've worked with over the years.
Um, well, first of all, being a woman owned small business has always been a really deep point of pride for me. I don't know if you know, but I'm a first generation immigrant whose working class parents came to the United States back in the 70s specifically for the opportunity that that it offered. The United States has just been tremendous, and I witnessed firsthand how the value of hard work, dedication, building something meaningful from the ground up, and that drive, for success has really, in that had an impact on me, and I'm hoping that that will have an impact on those that I work with. And so we've really made an effort to integrate that same thoughts, concepts, drive into everything that we do at UPCR. So it definitely has allowed us to be truly agile, and deeply client obsessed. We say client focused, but we're really client obsessed and deeply specialized in a way that, bigger firms, and we know firsthand, bigger firms have layers of bureaucracy. And so oftentimes they can't match to what we can provide. I mean, it's not often that you can get a senior level person like myself and others that are on my team to get involved with projects and without all of that overhead, and all of those additional decision makers. And our clients, many of them that are, mid-sized and enterprise companies, they love that approach. They love the fact that they have access to us. They get tailored solutions, faster response times, and true partners who understand and take the time to understand their business and provide them with solutions that they can accomplish. Not just, oh, we can do this, we can do that, but really develop a work plan that they can implement and that they can feel as though they can do this year after year, that this isn't the burden that it's presenting themselves with. But as a women-owned small business, this has also opened important doors too, because it's helped attract a fantastic team of professionals who share in those same values of integrity and drive, that hustle, to be an awesome service provider, a little white glove service that oftentimes if we were in a larger firm, we may not be able to do, and to do it as successfully as we do here at UPCR. It's really great. Been around
So,
now to celebrate our 16th anniversary.
well, congratulations. That's fantastic. And, it sounds like it's a business that was built from your personal experience of hard work, grit, and determination. And you look for that in your, in your staff and your team, and you sort of carry that forward with your client obsessiveness, which I love that term. For a company leader that's tuning in right now, who knows that they probably have unclaimed property problem at their business and they've been putting it off, what are the most important next steps that they can take right away to start sort of alleviating or getting a better control of this?
Don't panic, but don't wait. Don't delay. Be as proactive as possible. Understand your business and then enlist a team. Pull in all of the team members across all of the cross functional areas that impact compliance. Pull them in, take a look at those areas to see if there's underreporting, if there is any reporting at all, if there's gaps in filings, but definitely don't panic. There's an opportunity here if you take the time to learn efficiently, but pull in your team members. The sooner that you can enlist a team, the sooner that you can tackle this. In a short amount of time, you'll realize that you have either a significant, a moderate, or a low risk level. If you enlist people, don't just make assumptions. And to the extent that you do recognize where there is a lack of compliance and you understand your business and you know where you're conducting business, reach out to those states and enlist in or enroll in one of their voluntary disclosure programs. Some states are formal, some states are informal, but establish that contact with those states. As soon as you do that, it almost cuts off the opportunity for an audit. So definitely, if nothing else, be proactive. And then I would also trust a specialist. Reach out to a specialist like us to develop a plan, one that can be attained in a short amount of time, and make the investment in tools, in technology, in intelligence, in experience, and embrace it. And so you'll find that if you do all of these things and you get ahead of it, that it's really not that bad. And, compliance needs to be continued year after year. Next year will be much easier than the first time.
Right. The first time can be the most challenging. So if I get this, if I heard this correctly, it's uh, don't panic, don't wait, and don't go it alone.
Exactly. Because if you do wait, then you could be subject to an audit. Then you're at the mercy of these auditors, as opposed to in a voluntary disclosure being, in the driver's seat, conducting your own self-review. Oftentimes these voluntary disclosures, they will waive interest and penalties. And in an audit, that's not the case. So if you wait, it could also be costly. So it's always better to be proactive, get ahead, be in charge, enlist the right team, put the right people on the bus, enlist the right team internally and externally, and get into compliance. And then you'll realize that once you put a program together year after year, it'll just be like a well-oiled machine.
Makes sense. So, a quarter of a decade of experience and more, and your time at UPCR, I'm sure that you've seen some genuinely fascinating situations. Without naming names, what are the scenarios or stories that are sort of top of mind, and how did you work to help resolve them?
Hmm. All right, I can think of a couple, and I'll leave my favorite for last. So, oftentimes, businesses, just as a general practice, will void checks, and this is yeah. They'll I'll just explain it, and then I'll voice my opinion. But being in this space for as long as I have, we have definitely seen many different situations, and the few that come top of mind is one business that we were working with. They were annually voiding checks that were stale dated. And so that, if you think about it, in an audit, that is a red flag, because auditors generally will treat any voided check over 30 days as potential unclaimed property. In this particular case, this company was voiding checks, but they were voiding checks with good reason. Unfortunately, they just weren't documenting it. And they had lack of support for these reasons. And so when we came in, we identified this as a risk area. Although at the end of the day, it wouldn't have resulted in an assessment because we were able to remediate them. But we assisted them in developing a process where they were documenting the voids much better,
Right.
well documented. They were keeping a source information that supported the reason behind their voiding. And
Right.
so that was one example that I think can resonate with a lot of businesses that practice voiding checks on a regular basis. With a merger and acquisition, so we were brought in to be part of a due diligence exercise.
Okay.
And in this case, we were representing the buyer, and they were interested in this target company that had not been in compliance, had never filed, and had been in existence for at least 15 years, if not longer. And so we did a high level risk assessment. And, at first, we didn't even know if the deal was going to go through because it was a quite significant dollar amount that we had conducted as a high level analysis. But we ended up, at the end of the day, working with the target company to identify their true issues. We quantified the probability of these issues and what the compliance obligation would be. We ended up becoming a part of the agreement, the purchase agreement, made some changes that ended up not only benefiting the target, but also the buyer, so
Right.
that the buyer could take on this obligation with the knowledge and the documentation to support, so that going forward, when they came forward on behalf of this now acquired entity, they can
Right.
roll them into their existing program, and everybody wins because the sale goes through. It
Right.
goes through with, strong documentation,
Right.
support for compliance, and the buyer is not putting themselves in a situation where they have successor liability, but they weren't planning for it, and they didn't anticipate it. Well, you know what, they knew what they were getting themselves into, and they handled it beautifully, and everyone won. So that was a really great experience. So my last story, and I think I may have mentioned it to you at one point, was early on in my career when I was working for Deloitte. We had the opportunity to work with a group of hospitals, and in those days, it wouldn't be uncommon for us to be on site conducting a review. And so we happened to be in a conference room looking through records, and we're going through a payroll account, and we're noticing a series of payroll checks that were uncashed. And so we asked the payroll department, we asked the controller, and I said,
Mhm.
there's a series of checks and they're all around the same dollar amount. They were all payable to the same person. Something happened here. And so they ended up explaining that, oh, that's so and so. He's our night shift a custodian. He's here part time. And so we were like, okay, well, has anyone ever communicated to him that he's not cashing his payroll checks?
Right.
And again, not uncommon for us to be on site and working a bit late.
Right.
You have an opportunity to meet with the gentleman. So I had approached him, and I said to him, "Why are you not taking these checks to the bank?" And he's like, "I am taking them to the bank." I said, "You are? Then something's wrong." And I mean, you're going to the teller, you're not, what are you doing? And he's like, "Yeah, I'm taking them to the bank. I am putting them in my box." And I said, "You're putting them in your safe deposit box?" He's like, "Yes, it's my box." And I said, "Okay." He's like, it's a surprise for my daughter. I'm saving for her college fund." And I lost it. And I
Oh,
said to him, "Oh, I think that that's great, but the paper is not worth anything if you're putting it in the box. You really need to cash those checks, and then you can put those funds in
yeah.
the box." And
Right.
he laughed so hard. He's like, "Oh my gosh, I did not realize that I was doing that." And so we corrected, that issue. We ended up voiding all of those checks, reissuing him one big check. And he enjoyed that story so much that he then ended up admitting to his daughter what he was doing and surprising her with that check once we reissued, or the hospital reissued that check. So, it's just like these types of stories that reminds us that in unclaimed property, it's not just about these checks and the paper that it's being written on and the accounts that we're going through. There's a true human element
Right.
that's attached to each and every one of these situations and transactions. So it's my absolute favorite story. It just really puts in perspective. And I'm hoping that these different situations that the audience can identify with, because it happens more often than we can imagine.
Such a heartwarming story, and it is so lovely to hear the human side. And there is a human side in unclaimed property. We hear it from many of our guests on the show, and we love to sort of make that known to more people. And I think you had three really great examples. And what also struck me with one of your examples as it relates to mergers and acquisitions is that I think sometimes people can think of unclaimed property as just kind of like a function, and it's something that has to get done, an obligation. But there's also a strategic side that you proved. And so in that mergers and acquisition example, nobody wants surprises, especially in that scenario. In working with them, it really was a strategic decision on both sides to implement that strategy working with you. So that was interesting to hear. So let's look ahead now. We've got a crystal ball, and we're going to ask you to be a psychic here. So over the next 5 to 10 years, we're going to have more international jurisdictions introducing unclaimed property laws. We've got RUPA continuing to reshape the domestic landscape. We've got crypto, digital assets entering the space, and we've got this thing called AI on top of it all. So what do you see as the biggest challenges and the biggest opportunities for companies in this incredibly dynamic landscape?
I'm so excited. I think that we are at the beginning of some really exciting times ahead. The next 5 to 10 years is going to be transformative, in my opinion. I mean, opportunities, for example, opportunities using AI, that is going to lend itself to much better owner matching. It's going to, I mean, traditionally, we were trying to match owners to an unclaimed property item in that was really difficult. I mean, the name variations, the outdated addresses, the incomplete data. I mean, I'm hoping that AI is going to help in really helping in cleaning the data and in helping in matching so that we can increase the amount of property that is being claimed. But it's that garbage in, garbage out. So if our holders are utilizing AI tools when they are reporting, the amount or the quality of the data that's being reported will just organically lend itself to better claiming opportunities, right?
Right.
So I think that AI is just going to be transformative for our industry. And then I'm also thinking that it's going to have a huge potential in impacting like predictive analytics, just helping in forecasting and helping in identifying areas where there could be some weaknesses in process, that there could be areas where we can highlight reporting gaps, where using some trend analysis. So there's a lot of opportunity with AI that I envision the next few years to have a tremendous impact, but we need to embrace it. A lot of folks are intimidated by AI and feel like it is going to replace us. We just talked about the human element, right? I don't think that if we can embrace AI and all that it has of its capabilities, I think that we can really complement it to the human side of our practice. So that's where I think that it's going to have a tremendous impact. But then there's also with digital assets and crypto, having having a means of tracking transactions, the recording, blockchain, having that opportunity to be able to utilize a secure or a digital ledger, where you're recording these transactions, to be able to identify the movement of crypto and digital assets that are growing, in our industry. um, just it's just going to revolutionize how companies are going to be able to prove ownership
Right.
of, an ownership history, just, to be able to track, and then to be able to comply with the reporting requirements that are still, in my opinion, in its infancy stage with
Right.
states. I mean, states are, we're challenged. So to talk about the opportunities with AI and all of its potential uses, I mean, that's also going to have an impact of a challenge with states. States are still navigating, through these property types, and how they should enforce laws, or change their laws. RUPA has that impact as well. So as practitioners, we have this opportunity to work side by side, shoulder to shoulder with states in a space where we are both entitled to learn and to see what's out there, and to build a process that, again, makes it easier for the holder to comply with these laws. The more difficult you make it, the less compliance. And
Right.
maybe that's the goal, but I think that the goal should be that you make compliance easier, so that you can increase what is it today? That there's 20%, if that, of compliance nationwide. I mean, we want to build that up. Let's utilize these tools that are available to us now and in the next 5 to 10 years. Work with the states that are learning as we are learning, and work with them. I think that everybody wins in this case, right? The states win because they'll have increased compliance. Holders will win because they will have set guidelines, right? And claims and claimants will also win. Everybody just ends up working together to increase compliance and increase opportunity for claims as well. There's how much that's out there that's open for claims. I think the more that we comply, the more
Right.
reporting, that's only going to increase the
Right.
opportunity for claims.
Right. Well said. And I think we, of course, at Asset Find are very much in agreement with AI being at the foundation of everything that we do. And we do everything that we can on the sort of recovery, recovery and discovery of assets that are out there. One thing that really sort of stayed with me was, if the holders could also be leveraging, better practices in AI as well. Again, we're back to this idea of win-win. So again,
Right.
fear not. AI is where we need to sort of be leveraging everything in our processes and technology, and it's not something to be feared, but something to be embraced. The power
Yeah,
could be pretty fantastic
no
in the
doubt.
years.
I think that the winners will be, those companies that invest in systems, in integrated systems, ongoing education, and strong partnerships. Getting a specialist involved. Don't do this alone. And I think that once they embrace, we will see a transformative 5 to 10 years. That's just really going to be amazing. Just really need to embrace it and make the investment. And the investment shouldn't just be monetary. The investments are time. I think that our time is more valuable than money. It has an impact on everything. It has a direct impact on everything. So the more that we can invest in our time, I think that that's the best resource for everything else that will come from it.
I think that was beautifully said, Carla. And our time is up now. And I would want to thank you so much for such incredibly engaging conversation. It's been a pleasure having you on the show. And we can't wait to talk to you again sometime soon. And thank you again, everybody, for tuning in.
Thank you. Take care.